joining us, we are talking about leveling up in Dungeons and Dragons. And we've been talking about the basics, how it works in the builder, where your basic instructions are in the player's handbook and the Dungeon Master's Guide, and your class pages to guide your choices. But that's not all. Leveling up involves choices and gives you some options which have only increased over time. As Sam, you were referencing, often truly it's between you and your DM. You could make any level of changes at any time to your character and no one can stop you. Just a quick reminder, D&D is just you all at your table deciding how it works, but there are a lot of helpful guidelines to shape that process and frame that process. Or if you're playing in a strict, like an adventurers league or other setting where everybody kind of needs to be on the same page, there may be some strict guidelines. And that's where we get to some of these optional rules. Right away, when they give you leveling information, we also have optional rules. Those are feats. You may or may not let feats replace your ability score increases at certain points in your character evolution. And multiclassing, which is if Clanky the Owlin has decided they've had a change of heart, artificing is part of their life, but they also feel that they would like to make a shadowy deal with an unknown force, and now they're an artificer warlock. College is full of temptations. Anything can happen. Um, then you may start adding class levels in a different class, which are going to function differently. And then by the time we get to Tasha's of Cauldron of Everything, they wrote up an official guideline for if you would like to let your players make subclass changes. They recommend doing that at a level up point, and they give you some really helpful suggestions. So we'll do our last. I'm going to the sources because I like to look it up. Tasha's Cauldron of Everything's optional subclass, optional customization includes potentially changing your subclass. You can change a skill. And you should look out for this in your class pages. Certain of the spellcasting ones will also let you know that you can swap spells out if you are in one of the permanent choice classes. Those are options that you already had between you and your DM. But as of the guidelines in Tasha's, they give you some helpful things. You might want to incorporate training, incorporate story things that explain how this happened, or go with a dramatic sudden cause for these. And they give you some inspiration and some guidelines for putting that into play. So, options on the table. Really take your favorite from among feats multiclassing or swapping subclasses. Sam, do you have favorite options or guidelines you use?
Well, one I what I truly love about the option to change your subclass is that it allows all players to relax. You can't screw up leveling. If you feel different and you want to change your subclass, you can. That's within the rule set of Dungeons and Dragons, and so you don't have to worry of like, what if I do it wrong and like I get like a bunch of levels deep and I'm not where I want to be. Tasha's has your back. There are a lot of options that allow us to be flexible and to experiment. And if we fall in love with the character, we can still have whatever sort of build we were trying to get at in the first place. If maybe I know the first time I play a class, I don't always know how I'm going to play it or what I'm going to like about it. And
Sure.
so I really deeply love that option. But I love feats. I've built entire characters around a feat. These optional abilities are often very strong, often very cool, and it can be anything from shoring up your ability as a spellcaster to cast effectively and make that high spell slot thing stick, or to be able just to whap everybody with a polearm. Everybody.
Okay, well,
Know them
hold
too.
on. Which I these are amazing build ideas. Do you
Yeah.
have off the top of your head, when you're shoring up spellcasters, do you have a favorite feat or two that you like to look at?
Warcaster. Warcaster. It's
Mhm. I was
Warcaster.
gonna say
It's Warcaster.
Warcaster. Always
For
War
those at home, Warcaster is a feat available through these optional rules that I
It's
might be
2 words.
spelling wrong. Let's find out.
2
Could be
words.
2 words.
That's such a good
Aha!
error message. Sorry.
I believe there have been some updates to the error message as well. Thank you, devs, on that one.
We're very literal.
Uh, you have practiced casting spells in the midst of combat, learning techniques that grant you the following benefits. You have advantage on Constitution saving throws that you make to maintain your concentration on a spell when you take damage. You can
Wonderful,
perform the
wonderful.
somatic components of spells even when you have weapons or a shield in one or both hands.
Amazing.
When a hostile creature moves movement provokes an opportunity attack from you, you can use a reaction to cast a spell at the creature. I don't think I've ever noticed that. Rather than making an opportunity attack, the spell must have a casting time of 1 action and must target only that creature. Does that use a slot?
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay,
but
fair.
you get to do it rather than, the marshal always gets to use the thing they're very good at, hit it with a sword. Warcaster means if you're a spellcaster and someone gets all up into your business, you can actually do something with an opportunity attack. Because many of us are but humble small wizards who can't thwack very hard. But with Warcaster, you have the opportunity if they think you are to be trifled with to show them otherwise. But I love the advantage on Constitution saving throws for con checks for Warcaster. Uh, there are so many good spells that are concentration and will make me very sad if I get hit and they go away. I get to keep them
I mean,
with Warcaster.
to be fair, that's when you guilt the rest of your party about being like, why are these attacks landing on me? Somebody could be throwing their body at this. I'm just saying. Uh,
Your words, not
now,
mine. But yeah, Barbarian, where were you? No.
you also mentioned, I believe, a martial feat that might be one of your go tos.
I love Polearm Mastery. One of the
I
very
hate polearm
classic.
master. As a DM,
As a
I
player
hate
or as a
polearm
GM?
master. As a DM, yeah.
Ah,
How
there it
dare
is.
you?
You can keep your enemies at bay with reach weapons. You gain the following benefits. When you take the attack action and attack with only a glaive, halberd, quarterstaff, or spear, you can use a bonus action to make a melee attack with the opposite end of the weapon. This attack uses the same ability modifier as the primary attack. The weapon's damage die for this attack is a d4, and it deals bludgeoning damage. When you're wielding a glaive, halberd, pike, quarterstaff, or spear, other creatures provoke an opportunity attack from you when they enter your reach.
It pairs very
Dev's
That
making a
nice
is
face.
with Sentinel, another feat, and you can
just
oh, good, I'm making Michael very sad. Excellent.
everyone, just
Showing
go
that you
ahead,
don't have to
everyone.
just take one feat. You will miss an opportunity to take an ability score increase every time you take these, but they're well worth looking into. And sometimes you might want to game out like maybe I'll increase my strength to 20 and then take feats or sort of get comfortable so that I know I don't have to take more increases in a core stat or just plan for that sentinel later when I get to it.
Or don't, or
But
just don't.
having those
Don't have
options, they're fun.
Amazing.
And to
I
be
roll
threatened
about
dirty. Come on,
50-50
do it.
between sort of characters where I use feats and characters where I just do ability score increases. I change my mind a lot on that because they're both obviously very rewarding. Michael, on the options, on feats and multiclassing and swap and subclasses, do you have favorite ways of making those decisions?
I generally open all character creation options to the table. I've been playing with my players for a decade or so. So they know, if I'm letting you have all the options, please don't optimize to such a point that, to the detriment to the other players. Um, I think the only, I don't know of any particular restrictions that I will put, but if there are cases where they want to change a subclass or they want to swap out a feat or make some other change to their character, I'll try and make it a part of the game itself. So, oh, I don't want to be a monk anymore. Be like, okay, well, let's role play through that moment and let's have maybe I'll plan some downtime and you can meet a certain individual who will train you in the ways of being a fighter. So I try and make all of those options available to my players because as a player myself, I love all of the experimentation. I love trying new things, different combinations, and so I want to offer that to them. But I do try and make it make sense within the story itself.
Mm. Now, as a player, do you have go-to feats or options that you like to put on the table?
I try to mix it up. Warcaster, of course, though, is really hard to pass up on. Um, I've been really wanting to try out the Strixhaven Initiate feat since Strixhaven came out. Just because I've always dreamed of having a character that was part of a school of magic, and Strixhaven Initiate makes that really work even if you're, taking a martial class because you do get access to certain low level spells.
It is an interesting sort of it's not a multi-class, but I think it will likely feel like one. I have not rolled one of these up yet. But it is going to make for some very fun and interesting combinations, I think, when my fighter is casting light. Not that there aren't already interesting subclasses that sort of mix it up and do things like this. Um, but yeah. Things to know about
Also
multi-classing. Oh yeah?
oh, I was gonna say I also, am really keen on meta magic adept if I'm not playing a sorcerer,
Mm.
just so that you have
Yep.
one last little trick in your pocket. I have a player who's playing a Circle of Wildfire Druid who picked up meta magic adept with, Quickened spell, and I forget what the other one was, but he used Quickened spell last session. I was just like, That's so cool."
Oh,
So that takes some of the fun of the things you can do with sorcerer and makes them available in a reasonable and limited way to other folks. Introduced in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, which no, if you're sensing a theme, it's that Tasha's gives you options. um,
so good.
Tasha
It's so
hooked it
good. I
up.
love it so And what these feats show is that they're a great way to have a little splash of flavor that can make a class you're very familiar with feel like something new, to create a new take, or to elevate a fighting style or casting style that you already love by just giving that one cantrip that wasn't on your list before, or to get some extra damage with your sword with a slashing related feat. It's a nice way to have a little bit of an experience inside of something that you know that you love. It's like when they put chocolate inside the ice cream.
A great comparison, partly because I think one of the things about all of these various options that you have is that you're still going to have a satisfying D&D experience, even if you aren't messing with optional rules, even if you aren't multi-classing. There's a lot to be said for getting as far as you can go in one direction, for just letting your ability score increase your effectiveness at the things you're doing. You're never doing it wrong. That's ice cream. If you're like, but also chocolate and ice cream, very fun, there's no reason you can't do that. But that's why they have so many flavors. This stream was brought to you by Baskin Robbins, I guess.
So we talk about the
So,
swirl, yes, the multi-class.
indeed. Keys to multiclassing, you want to review those rules on multiclassing because unlike picking your class in the first place, there are prerequisites. You're going to need a little bit of sort of established talent that's going to help you pick up that new set of things. You won't get everything that comes with being a first level player, but there's a guideline to what you will. There is, again, a helpful table that's going to tell you how to figure out your spell slot situation if you are mixing and matching. And I believe all of those, the multi-class stuff is all in the player's handbook under optional rules. Um, Let me
They're
just get
also
it.
offered in the basic rules, so if you don't own the player's handbook on D&D Beyond, you can still find them in the free basic rules, which anyone can access.
Thank you. That is a great point. A lot of the stuff that we have been talking about being in the player's handbook, and to some extent, I think probably Basic Rules has an explanation of XP, the material that we talked about in the Dungeon Master's Guide. I'm not 100% sure,
I
but
believe
do always
so.
remember those are free for perusal on the site and full of good information. So yes, chapter 6 customization in the PHP will run down multi-classing, or you can check the basic rules. And they'll tell you about any sort of hinky things. If you have channel divinity twice, you just get more options, not more channel divinity. Uh, and between those, you can make some very, very fun combinations. Michael, is there any place people could go to learn more about, say, multi-classing in different classes?
Yeah, so we do a series of multi-classing guides as articles. So we're slowly working through the classes. We've done an artificer guide. We've done a. I'm blanking on. I forget what was it. What was the last guide
I
that I
believe,
did?
did you start with druids or? Hmm?
Oh yes, Druid. There was a Druid guide as well. Druids are really fun to multi-class with. So that's a really helpful guide. I also just find it really fun to just sit with 13 tabs open and just go through the different subclasses and see like what thematic connections I can make when I'm theory crafting, or just any features that I'm like, oh, this would be fun if I stuck like level one fighter, if I tacked on level one fighter to maybe an artificer that's an armor, and so I want to be better in melee combat. So making those sort of connections can be half of the fun of character creation.
All right. So, as I'm gonna throw in as quickly as we can. There's some great questions that have come in over the course of this hour. So rapid fire if we can. Key squared. When working with a multi-class character, what do you think about when deciding which class to take a level in next?
Good question. I've
Sam?
often had them back to back or started a touch higher so that I had had both as it happens sometimes. And often story will dictate. Uh, Often when people make that move into Warlock, it's because they're making a certain sort of decision and will invest into it. For others, if it's not as story driven, you can really go off of any particular point of, yeah, this feels fighter right now. I think I've been doing more monk stuff, and that's perfectly fine. One thing that I do like to pay attention to for picking your levels for multiclassing is the first level. Because as Amy alluded to, the second class you take gets a slightly different kit than the first, and it's particularly noticeable for things like proficiency in saving throws. Uh, so, for, say, a spellcaster, you might consider starting with a class that has Constitution proficiency to stack on top of your Warcaster feat and not lose your concentration. So, if you have two classes, look at the saving throw proficiencies, look at the proficiencies that you will get from starting in a given class, and see whether you want to start there.
I
I would
love
also
that.
consider, if your DM has told you this adventure runs from level 3 to 12, for example, take into consideration, all right, if I'm going to hit level 12, what do I want to be good at like level 6 or so? I also consider the milestones that you'll hit. So, for example, ability score improvements are every 4 levels. So maybe you want to stick to a certain class until you hit that, and then move on to something else. Um, with like your martial classes, you get extra attack generally at like level 5. So maybe you want to stick around to level 5 before you switch over to, maybe trying out a different class. And that way, you don't like nerf your build, or like you don't really fall behind. You have all the class features that you need to be effective while you're slowly building up toward maybe the subclass of another class.
And absolutely, it's never a requirement that you have figured out the best possible ways to sort of like, contribute your character, but often as players we can feel frustrated if we feel like we're not pulling our weight, if we feel like we're not having as much success. And so finding ways to balance that out can pay off for everybody essentially, without it ever being like you're a bad person because you didn't take every possible advantage there, because that, for me, that's not what everything's about. Mhm. Okay, let's see. Sorry, these are great questions. We from K squared again. What are some fun ways you've seen of approaching leveling in world? How characters learn and understand their new abilities?
I could
Michael.
actually speak to that. I ran a Waterdeep Dragon Heist campaign last year, and I had a player who started their first level in I think it was their first 2 levels in Ranger, because their backstory was that they had left the city, um, for a long time and lived in the wild because they disliked being a noble. They disliked living in the Seaboard and then living in that sort of, like, stuffy, very political sort of environment, and so he took levels in Ranger to his own detriment, um, and then as the adventure progressed, he actually started taking levels in Monk, which is a very weird combination, but in story, it made a whole lot of sense for his character because his character was trying so hard to reconnect with nature that the only way he could really do it was through meditation. And it sort of changed the way that he fought and it changed the way that he sort of like responded to the environment and to the challenges that he was facing.
That's so good. Let's see. Sir Manslot says my players prefer to start campaigns at level 3, but most of the D&D published books start at level 1. Do you have any advice for taking a campaign, maybe Strixhaven for example, and starting at a higher level without making the early sessions unsatisfying and without having overpowered characters as the adventure continues? Personally, I would probably throw in extra monsters. Uh it might sort of throw out of whack some of the skill challenges, but you can always just choose to DM like a little less generously than you might, be a little stricter on whether you think that explanation was good enough to satisfy that NPC. Because you've got more powerful characters making their cases, and you should expect them to persuade at it just anywhere that you have an easy, medium, hard lover, you have an option to sort of tune it a little differently. That's not a super mechanical explanation other than throw more things at them. But any tips, Michael?
Yeah, I would say that a lot of adventures you'll find the first chapter of the adventure tends to be a sort of introduction to the world. So, for example, in Strixhaven, spoiler alert if you don't want to get a glimpse of the first chapter, it
I'll
starts
wave
with
my
an
hands when we're done.
orientation. Oh, okay. Oh, well, I already spoiled. Well, it's like an orientation. So the characters are sort of exploring parts of specific parts of campus, and then it gives you like a little bit of a hint of what's to come in the later chapters. So I would say don't even. I would look at read through the first chapter, see what's the most important detail, and then just cut it, and then have the story start when there is that sort of like that big moment that happens that really kicks off the plot because you'll find that those early chapters are more about like getting the player's feet wet, getting them comfortable within the setting. But if you have a really solid session zero where you're talking things through, like your characters already met through orientation, you already have an idea of which colleges you're going to be a part of. All right, we're going to start with you guys in the dormitories. This is what you've already learned through your previous couple of weeks that you've spent together learning about one another. And all right, let's jump in.
Amazing. Spoilers are done.
Oh,
Fantastic advice is fantastic. And then you instantly have some suggested backstory you can give people of like, you're
mhm.
like, well, here's what you've already been through. Now you have those bonds in place. Let's see. Kiki Chappie says, "What do you do as a DM if you realize you've totally been forgetting about XP? Maybe asking about this about 35 years too late." I love that question. I'm gonna guess that the game went fine, whether you did or didn't remember. But I would say maybe just figure out where everyone is supposed to be based on the levels you've been landing at. And if you want to carry it on from there, just either set them all down to that point or advance everybody to the next level with a big, hey, guess what? You're all leveling up. And from there, everybody's exactly where they need to be and just carry it on forward. The only direction that
Hmm.
matters for our purposes. Speaking of directions that
Yeah.
matter, and I am just very we're gonna run out of time for this, but I have to ask because in talking and prepping for this stream, Sam, Do you have an approach to leveling up that may have killed me off stream before we started because I just never really actually thought it through?
I didn't realize it was weird until I was like, "Oh, so do we want an example of this?"
I'm
But
probably the weirdo.
what
I just, for the record, that's completely a possibility.
I think it's a strong possibility that I am the weirdo, or possibly both. But I've played a lot of games where I will skip around levels fairly frequently. Maybe a relatively short campaign where you're spending a few sessions at each level. I've had, some few sessions at level 5, then a few sessions at 10 and 15 and 20. And what I found was making all of those character sheets was really hard to level up, or I would get lost, or I would realize that I didn't want to do the thing that I was doing. And so, what I use for most of my leveling, is particularly when I make a plan for my character, is leveling backwards. I will build the 20th level version of the character, and with the lovely mechanic that Amy showed us at the beginning of the stream, you can just take away the number of levels, or remove a multi-class, or otherwise level it back down, and then you'll have something that's compatible with your plan. And you can do those for all of the stages. It works very nicely. It keeps me from getting lost, and it makes sure that I did the thing that I meant to do. And D&D Beyond facilitates
Absolutely.
it really nicely. It solved that problem. I'm the
I
weirdo.
am
Shut up.
curious, Sam, just because I haven't done it much. If you've set a bunch of choices and you take the numbers down, will the choices stay selected or do you just pick them again when you add the levels back?
I pick them up. So it's a reason that I will often create a duplicate or even make a printout from
Mm.
20th level, depending on, how many character slots I have available. But if you have enough, you can make a copy of your character sheet and move it down to 15 sheet, 10 sheet, 20 to 5 sheet, and all of them will that way be compatible. So if you have a campaign which for whatever reason skips you up through levels very very quickly, start with the highest one and then build down. D&D Beyond makes it so much easier. Backwards leveling. I'm the weirdo.
I love it. It's such a good idea. And I've just uh chats votes that this is weird but brilliant. Is what they've settled on apparently. I certainly I've heard people vaguely sort of we've talked a lot about like plan ahead what you might want, but literally just build it and then look at it and make sure that you have the correct building blocks to get there. Such a good idea. And of course, if you haven't seen it before, there you can in your list of characters there'll be a button for copy. So you can copy and make another one, or as Sam mentioned, export that PDF to save it for yourself and use as a reference. Whatever's easy and works for you. Thank you both so much for being here and sharing a lot of wisdom on leveling up in D&D. Any final thoughts that we weren't able to get to, Sam?
Ooh. Um I think overall, the takeaway is there are a lot of different ways to do this, and that there are a lot of systems both within the mechanics of D&D Beyond and within the rule set of Dungeons and Dragons that mean that this doesn't have to be overwhelming or very high pressure. You can see in your level ups each choice you have to make. You can open a tab to look up exactly what that means for your class. You can experiment with builds, and if you find you want to do swapsies, you can multi-class, or you can now even change your subclass. There are so many things you can do. You can experiment, but don't worry. Don't worry about the mechanics. Follow your story heart. You're going to have a good build.
Michael, last thoughts on leveling up.
Sam, actually, you reminded me of something that I've done that I find to be really fun when I'm planning out a build. If I need to make a level 5 character, level 6 character, is I will make copies of them and then I will use different multi-class combinations and then I can have the different character sheets open and then compare the numbers, compare like the spell selection, and then choose my favorite and then delete the other ones.
Michael just popping into the multiverse to meet 5 different versions of this wizard who decided to dip into different things, and then brutally eliminating, the ones that don't make the cut. So while we ponder the story implications of that for the many realities, thank you both. Sam, where can people find you on the internet?
I am a role playing performer and variety streamer throughout the Twitchernet. You can find me on Twitter at Tchaikovsky, Chaikovsky, or right below there. And you can find my full streaming schedule for Twitch on my Twitch About page. That's twitch.tv/Delevely, Delevely. It's easy to remember. The Lev is like level. That's what we did today. Woot.
Your level will increase the more time you spend watching this amazing content. Michael, where can people find you on the internet?
You can find me on D&D Beyond. I am constantly pumping out new articles, working with writers to publish more content. You can also find me on Twitter at Michael Galvis.
And you can find me and Enthusiame everywhere and back here next week for more D&D Beyond.
It's D&D.